Relationships are one of the main places where our values actually get tested. Welcome to Relationship Philosophy. My name is Jenny Morrow. I'm a 20-year marriage therapist and relationship coach. Let's dive in. I want to spend some time today talking about what I mean when I use the phrase relationship philosophy. I'm going to do that by breaking down 3 terms today: relationship advice, relationship coaching, and relationship philosophy. Relationship advice is generally quick tips and strategies about how to do something. Most of the relationship content you see in social media shorts fits into this category, and it looks something like, here's what to say when your partner gets defensive, or how to set a boundary when someone doesn't take no for an answer. Or it could be as simple as just little info bites like 3 signs that someone is emotionally unavailable. And sometimes these relationship tips and strategies and advice are really helpful and true, and sometimes they're not. The next term is relationship coaching. Relationship coaching takes relationship advice further. It takes the tips and the strategies that are inherent in relationship advice, and it engages them in a container that includes assessment and observation, usually of a specific relationship, and then it identifies patterns, teaches tools, offers practices, it tracks what's working and what's not, and tweaks things as needed, and it provides repetition and practice of skills, all with the goal of helping clients break their unhelpful patterns and develop higher levels of relationship skills. You can think of a basketball coach here or a music teacher. They will watch and observe you. They'll teach things that you might need to know, and then they can guide you in practices. They'll also be with you as you engage in practice over time so that they can answer questions, model things as needed, and give you tweaks to engage skills more effectively if they are seeing something from the outside that you might not be seeing from the inside of your practice. Now, all coaching processes are self-improvement processes aimed at a specific goal. In the case of relationship coaching, this might look like a goal of higher level relationship skills and better relationships. Now, I love the coaching process, and it encompasses a lot of my day-to-day work since I work with both individuals and couples who want to improve their ability to relate to themselves and to others. But I want to dive in and talk about the 3rd term, which is really what this podcast relates to, and that is relationship philosophy. So what is relationship philosophy, and how does it differ from relationship advice or relationship coaching? Let's start with the word philosophy. Philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia. I think that's how you say it. And this translates to love of wisdom. So what is wisdom? One way to define wisdom is to think of it in relation to defining knowledge. Knowledge is the accumulation of facts and data, and wisdom is the proper, sensible application of that knowledge to real-world scenarios. So, does wisdom require experience? Yes, but experience isn't the only ingredient, because even though direct engagement with life's complexities provides the raw material that allows you to take the facts and the data and actually understand how to piece things together, it is the internal reflection on those experiences, often combined with empathy and emotional maturity, that truly helps to cultivate that wisdom. And there are alternatives to direct experience. You can actually accelerate the process of gaining wisdom through vicarious learning. So studying history, consuming literature, listening to mentors. In the field of relationships specifically, it would be learning from mentors and teachers and researchers in that field specifically. So while wisdom does not always require direct experience, it does require a meta-level understanding of how to apply knowledge appropriately to different life situations. This implies that you don't necessarily need to experience everything firsthand to be wise, but you do need to be able to analyze what you know and observe deeply. Philosophy is really the practice of analyzing and reflecting on what is known or experienced to help us live more of the outcomes we truly desire in life, or what we might call a wiser life. Now, when applied specifically to relationships, I define relationship philosophy as the practice of examining what we truly want in love and relationships, and then observing and analyzing which worldviews, choices, and practices can actually produce the relationship outcomes we desire. And that's the foundation of this podcast. Now, there are 5 core branches of philosophy. There's metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics, and aesthetic. Metaphysics is a study of ultimate reality. It investigates the nature of existence, being, time, space, and the universe. And it can sound intimidating at first, but at the heart of it, metaphysics is really asking, what is real? What is the nature of existence? Who are we? What kind of a world are we living in? It asks questions about being, reality, identity, time, consciousness, and meaning. And when we bring metaphysics into relationship philosophy, we start asking some of the deepest questions underneath love and human connection. So, for example, are there such things as soulmates? Now, that might sound like a romantic question at first, but philosophically, it's actually a metaphysical question. Because underneath the idea of a soulmate are much bigger questions about the nature of love and even the nature of reality. So, are 2 people destined for each other in some way? Is there even a soul that exists? Is there one person that we are meant to find? Do certain relationships exist before we choose them? Almost as if they're woven into the structure of our lives? Or is love something less predetermined and more created through attention and choice and timing and devotion and growth? So metaphysics gives us a way to examine those questions without needing to rush into certainty. Some people experience love as fate. They meet someone and they feel as though they've known that person forever, almost as though the relationship has some kind of inevitability to it. And other people experience love as something that becomes meaningful over time, not because it was written in advance, but because 2 people keep choosing to build something real together. And relationship philosophy gives us room to hold both of these possibilities with curiosity. So maybe the question isn't only, is this person my soulmate? Maybe the deeper question is, what do I believe love is? Is love something that I discover, like finding a person who is already meant for me? Or is love something that we create, like building a shared life through presence, honesty, through repair, and through care? And this matters because our metaphysics of love shapes how we relate. If I believe that love is purely destiny, I may overlook the daily responsibility required to really create a healthy relationship. I may think, if this is meant to be, it should feel easy. Or if they are my soulmate, they should understand me without having to explain. They should be able to read my energy. But if I believe that love is only a choice and effort, I may dismiss the mystery of connection altogether. I might miss the strange and beautiful ways that some relationships come together, or that they do feel larger than logic. So metaphysics helps us to ask, what kind of a thing is love? Is it a feeling? Is it a choice? Is it a bond? Is it an energy between people? Is it a reality that we enter into? Is it something we make and create, or something we find? Or is it something that finds us? And we don't have to flatten this question into one simple answer. That's what's so beautiful, is that in relationship philosophy, the soulmate question and all metaphysical questions become less about proving whether there is one perfect person assigned to us, and more about exploring what it means to feel profoundly connected to another human being. What does it mean when someone changes the way that we understand ourselves? What does it mean when a relationship feels familiar or significant or life-altering? What does that mean for you? What does it mean to say this love is real? So metaphysics really brings us into the mystery underneath relationship, the mystery of how two people can become deeply connected without losing themselves, the mystery of how love can change our sense of identity, the mystery of how a relationship can be invisible and yet so profoundly real. Because you cannot point to love the way that you can point to a chair or a table. You can't hold a relationship in your hand, but you can absolutely feel when something is alive inside of you in the experience of or the presence of a relationship. You can feel when you experience yourself as feeling strained or tense. You can feel when trust has entered the room, and you can feel when it has left. So in relationship philosophy, metaphysics asks us to consider the invisible reality of love and what is this thing between us? Was it found, chosen, created, destined, or some kind of mysterious combination of all of these? Or is it just chemicals inside of us? How do we honor something that we cannot fully explain, but we're always trying to create? So metaphysics is really helpful for that. Now, the next branch of philosophy is epistemology. And epistemology is the study of knowledge. And it asks, how do we know what we say we know? It looks at knowledge, what we say we believe, or what we say is true. It takes our perception, our evidence, our interpretations, and what we say we are certain about. And it asks us questions like, what counts as knowledge? How do we know what we say we know? How do we tell the difference between what is really true and what we merely believe? How do we know when we should trust our perception, or what a lot of us call intuition? What makes something credible? And when we bring epistemology into relationship philosophy, it becomes incredibly personal, because so much of relationship life depends on what we think we know about ourselves, each other, and what is happening between us. So for example, I might think, I know my partner is upset with me, but how do I know? Did they tell me that they were upset? Did I notice their tone changing? Am I reading their facial expression? Am I remembering a pattern from the past? Am I sensing something real that's in the room, or am I just filling in the blanks with my own fear and my own story? So epistemology invites us to slow way down before we turn our interpretations into facts. Because in relationships, we're constantly making meaning. Someone pauses before they answer, and we decide what that pause means. Someone uses a certain tone, and we draw a conclusion. Someone forgets something important to us, and we decide that it reveals how much they care about us. And sometimes we're right. Our perception may be picking up on something real. There may be a pattern, there may be a rupture, there may be a misattunement or information in the body that the mind hasn't fully articulated yet, but a lot of times we're not right, even when it comes to people we've known for a long time. So sometimes what we call intuition is actually fear, and that fear can have a very confident voice. And sometimes what feels obvious is actually an old wound trying to organize the present moment around the past. So epistemology helps us to ask better questions. What did I actually observe? What am I actually seeing? And what story am I telling myself about what I observed? What evidence do I have? What else could be true? What would I need to ask before I decide that I actually know? So this matters because many relationship conflicts are not only conflicts about what happened, they're also conflicts about how each person knows what happened. One person says, I know you were trying to hurt me, and the other says, no, I was trying to explain myself. Or one person says, I know you don't care, and the other says, I do care, I just didn't understand how important this was to you. Or one person says, I know this relationship isn't working, and the other says, I didn't know you felt that way. So epistemology does not ask us to distrust ourselves. It really asks us to become more responsible with certainty. There's a difference between saying, this is what happened and this is what I observed happen, and saying, this is how I experienced what happened. There's a difference between saying, you don't care about me, and saying, when that happened, I felt uncared for. There's a difference between saying, I know what you meant, and saying, here's the meaning I made, and I want to check in with you and see whether I'm right. So that shift can change everything, because once I recognize that my interpretation is not the same thing as absolute truth or reality, I become so much more available for curiosity. And if I'm in relationship with you and you recognize that my experience is still real, even if my interpretation is incomplete, then we have a much better chance of finding each other. So in relationship philosophy, epistemology helps us to hold both humility and trust. I can trust my experience without assuming that my interpretation is perfect. I can listen to your perspective without abandoning my own. And I can care about evidence while also honoring emotion. I can say something feels off without immediately deciding that I know the whole story. And that is a deeply relational skill, and there are levels to our ability to become more and more advanced in these skills. Because love requires us to keep learning each other, not just once, not just at the beginning, but really again and again, as we change as individuals and as the relationship changes and as life changes us. So epistemology reminds us that one of the most intimate things we can say in a relationship is help me understand you. Not because we know nothing, but because we're humble enough to know that we never know everything and we want to be in a continual learning process. The next branch of philosophy is logic. Logic is the part of philosophy that looks at reasoning, arguments, and whether our conclusions actually follow from the things we're assuming. So if I say, because this is true, then this also must be true. And logic asks, wait, does that really follow? It helps us, again, to slow down and to look at the structure underneath our thinking. Are we making a sound argument, or are we just jumping to conclusion? Are we confusing what feels true with what is actually supported with evidence and with sound logic? So in that sense, logic gives us a way to tell the difference between reasoning that is clear and grounded and reasoning that has holes in it, even if it sounds convincing at first. So let's say that someone thinks, my partner didn't text me back for hours, so that must mean that they don't care about me. Now, logic would slow that down and ask, does that conclusion logically follow from the evidence? So the premise is, my partner didn't text me back for, let's say, 3 hours. But the conclusion is they don't care about me. And when we look closely, there are actually a lot of possible explanations between those two things. Now, logic is a little different than epistemology. Epistemology is asking, how do we know what we say we know? And logic is, are we following sound logical principles that actually help us make the most likely connections? Are we following the logical principles that allow us to see probabilities more and more accurately? So for example, if we were to say, just because someone didn't text back for hours doesn't mean that they don't care. It may mean that. That's one possibility, but what are other possibilities as well? Maybe they were busy, or they were overwhelmed. Maybe their phone died, or they saw the message and forgot to respond. Or maybe there really is a pattern of emotional neglect. But one delayed text by itself does not prove that. So logic helps us to know that. It helps us to know that one text like that does not prove that a partner doesn't care for us. Logic helps us to separate what actually happened from the meaning we are adding to it, and it does that by helping us understand sound, logical ways of thinking about things. So in relationship philosophy, this matters because, again, so much of our suffering happens when we treat our interpretations as facts. But a lot of us don't know how to not only ask the question of how do I know what I know, but then how do I use good logic? A lot of us just weren't trained in good logic. So often we don't just respond to what happened, we respond to the conclusion that we're drawing about what that means. And sometimes the most powerful relationship work begins by asking, is this true? But then it follows up with, does my logic really follow? Or are there other possible explanations? And are there better critical thinking skills that I can use here? Another major branch of philosophy is ethics. And ethics is where philosophy starts asking, how should we live? What is good? What is right? What do we owe ourselves and to each other in relationships? In relationship philosophy, ethics becomes incredibly personal because relationships are one of the main places where our values actually get tested. It's easy to say, I value honesty, but what happens when that honesty might disappoint someone or might get you into trouble with someone? So it's easy to say, I believe in kindness, but what happens when being kind starts to look like you're abandoning yourself? It's easy to say, I want to be loving, but what does love require when there's conflict or resentment or power dynamics or pain in the room? Ethics really asks us to look beyond what we want in the moment and to consider what kind of person we are becoming through the choices that we make in our relationships. So in relationship philosophy, ethics might sound like, what does it mean to be fair in love? Or when is compromise generous and when is it actually self-betrayal? Or what do I owe my partner and then what do I still owe myself? And I think that this is one of the reasons that relationships are so powerful. They don't just reveal our feelings, they also reveal our character. They show us where our stated values and our actual choices are aligned and where they are not. And ethics helps us to bring more consciousness to that gap. So let's say that someone believes a good partner is always supportive. At first, that sounds really beautiful. Of course, we want to be supportive, but ethics asks us to go deeper. What if my partner wants something that harms them? What if supporting them means staying silent when I actually see a pattern that concerns me? What if supporting them requires me to sacrifice my own well-being over and over again? So the ethical question becomes, what is the most loving thing here? Not just the most agreeable thing, not just the thing that avoids conflict, or not just the thing that makes me look like a good partner. Sometimes support looks like encouragement, and then sometimes it looks like honesty. Sometimes it looks like a boundary. Sometimes it looks like saying, I love you and I can't participate in this way. In relationship philosophy, ethics helps us to examine the moral texture of love. It asks us to become more thoughtful about the difference between being nice and being good, between pleasing someone and then truly caring for them, between loyalty to the relationship and loyalty to our own integrity. So just like all of these branches of philosophy, ethics has many, many layers that can be explored over time. The final major branch of philosophy is aesthetics. Aesthetics is often described as the philosophy of beauty, art, taste, and perception. It asks questions like, what makes something beautiful? And why are we moved by certain experiences? What gives something a sense of harmony, elegance, depth, meaning? And in relationship philosophy, aesthetics is a way of asking, what kind of relational life do I really want? And what kind of relational life are we creating? Because relationships are not just agreements. They're not just communication skills. They're not just logistics and conflict and repair and emotional regulation. Even though all of those things matters so much, relationships also have a felt quality. There's a tone to the way that we speak to each other. There's an atmosphere in the home. There's a rhythm to how people move together through daily life. There's a kind of beauty in being known and being witnessed, in being considered, and in having someone delight in us, in having someone remember how you take your coffee or notice when your face changes. Aesthetics asks us to pay attention to the art of relationship, not in a performative way, not in the sense of making our relationships look beautiful from the outside, but really in a deeper sense of asking, what does this relationship feel like to live inside? Does it feel harsh or does it feel tender? Does it feel like it's always rushed or does it feel spacious? Does it feel flat or does it feel alive? Does it feel chaotic or does it feel grounded? Does it have room for play, warmth, humor, sensuality, ritual, grief, repair, and surprise? In relationship philosophy, aesthetics helps us to remember that love is not only something that we prove through loyalty or explain through logic. Love is also something that we experience through beauty and presence and the texture of ordinary moments. And it invites us to ask, are we creating a relationship that is not only right, but also beautiful and meaningful? So that completes the 5 major branches of philosophy. And when we bring all of these branches of philosophy into the context of relationship philosophy, we start to see how rich this conversation about relationships really is. And this is why I'm so passionate about exploring relationships and about bringing this podcast to all of you, because relationships are not just something that we have. They are really something that we become through. Our relationships ask us some of the most important questions in our life. Who am I? How do I love? What do I owe myself? What do I owe another person? And what is true here? What is beautiful here? What is worth choosing? And maybe most importantly, what am I learning and who am I becoming through the way that I relate? So this is the heart of this podcast. This is not just a place where we'll talk about communication tips or relationship advice, even though those things are really important and we will talk about those things at times. This is really a place where we're going to slow down and look at the deeper ideas underneath our patterns, our longings, our conflicts, our commitments, and our love. And even underneath, what is the advice that we've gotten from others? What is the advice I might present here? Can we really dive a little deeper to what's underneath all of that? Because the way that we relate to ourselves, to life, and to other people really shapes our entire experience of being human. So I am so glad you are here. If this conversation resonated with you, I would love for you to follow the podcast or YouTube channel so you don't miss a future episode. You can go to my website and register for the newsletter if you want to stay in touch. And if you know someone that thinks deeply about relationships and personal growth, feel free to share this episode with them. And if you're listening on a platform where you can leave a rating or a review, that is really one of the most generous ways to support the podcast. It helps other people find these conversations, and it means so much to me. Thank you so much for being here for this first conversation on relationship philosophy. I'll see you in the next episode.